run into quite a few times over the years, is that you got to do a lot of exploring. You know, what was done properly, what needs to be redone. And so, so you end up checking through all those things. The good news was, when we were discovering that the engine was tight, I did do a pressure test on the cooling system, and it did hold pressure, so it would hold coolant, which would mean that hopefully the castings were sound. So, we didn't have a bad...
Well, on a rocket shaft, you're not going to know how worn it is. You're going to find out how worn it is, the shaft itself.
When you pull off the... you mind getting greasy? When you pull the rockers off, this side actually has a little screw in it. You'll see a little bit of wear in there, and you can measure, with a micrometer and gauge it out. I try to shoot for a running clearance of, maybe just under 1/1000, which is, yeah, just enough for the oil to be there.
So you're going to need new bushings for the rocket itself.
A lot of times you end up putting new bronze bushings in. But if there's wear on the shaft, then ultimately you got to replace the shaft. Because what happens is you have the wear spot where the rocker was riding, but then there's no wear on the pedestal. So if you trimmed it down, you took it to a shop and had it ground down, then it wouldn't fit properly in the pedestals. And then you have to go to correct all that. So.
Tim, was it apparent to you that they did anything with that rocker shaft mechanism when they did the rest of the work?
It doesn't look like it was done at that point in time. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're taking rockers off is to keep track of which one came off from where and to put it back in that area. If you look, each one has a little bit of an angle to it. And you can put the whole thing together and find out it's not contacting the top of the valve as it should. And also the fit of it on the rocker shaft, on the shaft itself. So it's just one thing to keep in mind, is keep everything in order.
These rockers aren't numbered in order?
They typically aren't. Sometimes people scribe a number in there, but they're hard enough that they're hard to number. So that's probably why they didn't.
Oh, okay.
So I normally will take a like a paint type marker and number each one, or I wire on a metal tag and keep track of them that way. So, and it is an important thing to do with anything that has a series of pieces like that. Keep track of where it came from and make sure you try to get it back. Even if it didn't seem like it mattered, it sometimes does. So we'll just put that back in place. So another thing that I wanted to mention was they have a special little washer that keeps that down. I'll show you one of them. Rolls-Royce was always big in having special fasteners for everything. So we have these little washers that have these little domes that fit right into these areas. And a lot of times they're missing or gone or not properly fitted. And it's always nice to have those kinds of things. So, sometimes people don't realize that it was something unique and they throw it away or whatever, or lose track of it.
So they're actually cup ground?
Yeah.
So if they're missing, you have to grind them again, or can you buy them?
Usually I have a little stash of them somewhere that, from over the years.
Of course.
But there's times I have to make them up. And they had these little things in different little areas, like where there needed to be some flexibility, like in an exhaust fitting or something like that. So
You probably cannot buy them at Ace Hardware.
no.
It's a shame.
You can ask.
You can ask. It's amazing what you can find sometimes.
And also during the process, I like to keep stuff bagged out as much as I can.
So this is all lubricated just from that one center spot?
I undid the oil line that comes through in here, and then there's passageways that go up through there, and then there's a hole here, and then that all distributes out through the rocker. And then each one, a little bit of oil will come out, and that will lubricate, the top here. And then that oil goes down in and then goes onto the camshaft.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it goes right through the guide.
It goes down around, some of it is going to go and lubricate the valve a little bit, but it's going to go around like the push rod hole.
Boy, those are delicate push rods.
They are.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. There's not a whole lot of, the springs aren't all that strong.
But they didn't rev
But,
up very, very high.
Right, it's a low revving, yeah. So the other challenge is keeping track of hardware. And normally I like to go with bagging and you know, a Sharpie and marking things. Sometimes I'll use like a basket. I'll have an accumulation of baskets and I group parts into there, and then I can run them through the washer and then get most of the grease off and then bag them again. So you know, it just makes going back together a little bit easier. And as you're taking apart, you want to kind of keep track of, oh, there's a nut missing here or a bolt missing there. Because when you go back together, you're going to be all excited to get your engine back together and find out you're missing parts of the hardware, and you should have ordered those, you know, months ago when you made your other order for parts or whatever you needed. And, you know, it can lead to a little bit of frustration because now you're waiting a whole nother week just to put another component on you thought you were going to put on that afternoon. So yeah, so my plan at this point would be to get the cylinder head off. And one of the nice things about when you start getting into the later pre-war cars is you have kind of an option. You can take the cylinder head off with the manifolding on and in place. And which, you know, sometimes it's easier to do that, and then you can put that component to the side and then keep working along and everything stays in its place. Especially if you're doing a situation where you know you have a bad head gasket and you want to just replace the head gasket and you don't want to go to the trouble of taking off all the manifolding. So you can certainly leave it in place and undo the nuts and bolts and lift the head off. So that's probably going to be the next phase of it, is undoing all the cylinder head nuts. I see that the previous guy had put in some American bolts in place of the original studs, I guess. Now these, and they're in the center row. The center row just go into the cylinder block. So I guess he had problems with those threads or those studs, and so he decided to put those in. And now the other ones, and there's a lot of them, and that going around the whole perimeter, they go all the way down through the block and then into the crankcase. So you want to
they're
be
threaded right into the aluminum.
Yes, yeah. And the challenge of it is that on the end they have a flange. So if one were to break, you know, sometimes you decide you're going to have somebody retorque your head and they think, oh, it's just like you know, the Chevy I worked on the other day, and the torque is 50 foot-pounds, and you know, they break it at 22. And then they think, oh, I just have to put a new stud in. Well, then they realize that the stud is flanged at the bottom and it doesn't come up through the whole. So you got to take the whole engine apart to replace one stud. So I always say, you know, be very careful when you get to that stage of things. That's something you don't want to break. If, you know, retorquing a head, you have to be super careful and take your time with it. So the next item to get out are push rods, and now a lot of times these are actually numbered. It's very, very hard to see the number. And if it were there, it'd be at the top. I don't see one on this one, but anyway, you know, we'll take them out and we'll keep them in order, just you know, for the principle of it.
You feel free to come up and look.
Grade 5 bolt.
Yeah, yeah.
Or pull ports off.
Was Royce alive when this engine was designed?
No.
This
No.
was, what, 35?
This would be like the 36, 37 era. So yeah, the 2530 took over the 2025, and it was sort of an interim car between 2025 and Wraith. The Wraith, I don't think, was quite developed well enough, so they figured, well, let's update the 2025 a little bit, and that'll carry us through a little bit. If we have a larger bore and a little bit more advancements. So that's why you see this sort of odd-looking manifolding setup. Whereas the 2025 manifold had, fitted nicely, and then the carburetor was on the side of the block here. And whereas this was sort of an afterthought. They redesigned the manifold, and then they had the carburetor sitting up on here.
And a new carburetor.
And a whole different
Strumper.
carburetor.
Yeah.
Right.
Strumper just like on the Packard.
Right. So, again, it was sort of like an afterthought. It was, let's update the 2025. That'll carry us over to the Wraith. Because the Wraith and the Phantom 3 are completely different from all other models. Whereas you could see the evolution a little bit more clearly, like from Silver Ghost to Phantom 1, the chassis are basically the same, but the engines were updated. Then they went from Phantom 1 to Phantom 2, they updated the chassis. They did do a lot of engine changes, but then when they got into Phantom 3 and Wraith, then they just threw everything out and started all over again with suspension and chassis and engines, and which was surprising it didn't bankrupt the company, but that's what they did.
That's why Charles had those accelerator pumps for the carburetor, kind of similar to the Panthers he makes.
Oh, okay.
One of the things that makes this engine a good candidate for this is not only the car is interesting, but the fact that somebody had been at it, so, oh yeah, sure, that's the last one. So yeah, so things should come apart a little bit easier than if they've been together for umpteen years and haven't been touched.
So we're cheating.
To a degree now. Now, this is an occupation I've been doing for a number of years, 30 years now. And during the process, I would say maybe 80% of my work is redoing bad work. And it can be anything from a car fresh rolling out of a shop, and it could be even a fairly well-known shop, to something that somebody had done at another shop, and then the problem developed shortly afterwards. And sometimes the stuff I find, it made absolutely no sense what they were thinking. This was somebody who knew what they were doing, but for some reason they had to take a shortcut, or at least they thought they had to. Maybe they had an owner that was, getting irritated with the process and running out of money, or maybe they just didn't know how to handle it properly. So they get the thing sort of thrown together and out the door. And so over the years I've done everything from redoing clutches that have been redone to having to rebuild an engine many times that had been rebuilt in another shop. And in some cases, the individual probably could have spent $30,000 or $40,000 rebuilding an engine, and it went 1,000 miles. And then you start taking it apart, and I found everything from broken bolts that were glued back in with silicone.
No.
And
I wouldn't even do that.
right. Again, they wanted to get the thing out the door, and that's what they did. And yeah, and it's really amazing what you find. They'll have a bad thread, and they'll take all thread from the hardware store and run a tap in there and screw that in there. Well, who thinks that's a good idea, but that's what you run into, and it's...
Are you already worried because they've used American bolts here?
That is a worrisome thing, especially using a low grade like that. I think I would have, but it's a correctable.
They run right down through the oil passage?
This one, if you look, there's a special washer there that has a flange, and then normally that'll isolate the passageway from where the oil goes through.
So the exhaust valves and the intake valves are just that in?
I would say that it is a different valve. The spring is the same.
See the heads of the shafts are the same there.
Yeah.
What do you mean they're the same? That one's like flat and that one's...
Well, this is thin, that's
Yeah, that's thin one, so the shaft diameter is less.